I'm going to talk today about hearing from God. And this is especially meant for the people who are at the very beginning stages of their journey. If you are more advanced, you're gifted prophetically, I have some talks planned that I'll do someday for you. But right now, if your eyes are beginning to be open to the fact that God still speaks today, then there are things that I would like to say to you. And right now I have this plan to be 2 parts unless I get too long-winded. And the one today will be a couple of general principles about hearing from God. And then the next one, which hopefully I'll get done soon, will be some very specific things to help you on your journey. But right now, 2 general thoughts about hearing from God. And the first one is, you cannot live the life that God intends for you without hearing what he is saying. Christianity is impossible unless you can hear God's voice. You know, I'm absolutely amazed that for over 4 decades of my life, I believed what so much of Christianity had taught me, and that was all I need is the Bible. And now I see so clearly that the testimony of the Bible is not stories of people who read the Bible. It's stories of people that interacted with God, people that heard God, God coming down from heaven and visiting people disguised as a man, God sending angels to come down and talk to people, God appearing in a flaming bush, God speaking to thousands of different prophets who passed on these words and guided kings and other people into what they should do. I mean, that is the story of the Bible. That is what we need. And that's just the Old Testament. If you go into the New Testament, what does the Bible talk about? It's God who came down and interacted with us. And it is God who went back to heaven, but who sent his Holy Spirit to interact with us. You just can't get away from this. The Bible is not stories of people reading the Bible. The Bible is stories of people who heard God speak. The Bible cannot do this. Hearing God is what allows us to live. And Jesus himself said that we were like sheep, and he is the master or leader of the sheep. And how do the sheep know where to go? How do they know what to do in life? It's when they hear the master's voice and they learn to discern his voice apart from all others. Then they can go out, then they know what to do, then they have direction. Without that, we're just sheep, we're just lost. Jesus also said that the Holy Spirit would come and that he would teach us everything. He said having the Holy Spirit would be better than having Jesus with us. And come on, think of all the times that Jesus interacted with the disciples. Well, you got to have something that offers you that and even more. The Holy Spirit must speak to us. Paul tells us that there are 2 foundational giftings for all of Christianity. And without these things, if you do not have the foundation, everything fails. And one of those giftings is prophecy. It's the prophets. If you don't have the prophets, if you don't have people who hear really well from God, you can't have Christianity. Let me just give you a couple of stories from my own life to show you how lost I would have been if God hadn't spoken. The first one is kind of funny because it comes from a time in my life when I didn't know how God spoke and I wasn't sure how much he really did speak. But if we go back in my life about 15 years ago, 16 years ago in that area right there, my wife and I were married, we were happy, we didn't have kids, and we had no plans to have kids. We didn't care either way. We didn't care if we had kids, we didn't care if we didn't. We were very content where we were. And there was a woman in our church who was gifted prophetically, but didn't let anybody know about it. And one day she heard God talk to her about us, about my wife and I, adopting children. And she kind of argued with God, and she didn't want to talk to us about that because she's like, that's something personal. And so she said to God, the only way that I will bring up adoption with Ken and Rachel is if when I go to Sunday school today, nobody else shows up in the class except for Ken's wife and myself. And I don't remember how many ladies were normally at that Sunday school class. It was more than 10, maybe 15 or so ladies. And so she goes to church, and guess what? All the other women had excuses for why they wouldn't be at Sunday school that day. It was just Rachel and this woman. And so she told her what she thought God had said to her. And I remember so clearly after the service was over. I mean, I don't remember the church service. I don't remember what I preached on. I don't remember any of that. But I remember when my wife came into the office and she told me what Esther had said about adoption. And it was the craziest thing because I was sitting here, and one moment I was right here, totally, completely content to never have children. And then when I heard what God had said, it's like he spoke it into my spirit. Now at that time, I didn't understand this. I didn't know what to call it. But it is the craziest thing sometimes when God speaks, because you can be right here and, oh, having no kids is fine. And then one moment later, I know I have to be a dad. I know that there is a child or children out there that are supposed to be ours. That was God speaking to us about this. God speaking to this woman to even bring it up to us. Then God speaking into our own lives about it. So we began to pursue it and fill out the mountains of paperwork. But the problem was we had no money for it because it is buku thousands of dollars to adopt children. And so we're trying to figure out what to do about that. And one day, a man calls me up. Again, a funny part of the story, because I would guess this man would say that God doesn't speak today. But he had this compulsion. He had this thing he could not get out of his head. He had told his wife, and his wife said, you can't bring that up to Ken and Rachel. You can't tell them that. But he couldn't escape it. And so finally he called me up, another one of those moments where I remember so clearly answering the phone. And he said, Ken, I'm going to sell some of my farm equipment, and I'm going to give you the money, and I think it's for an adoption. Without God speaking, because let me tell you this, nobody knew. Nobody knew. There may be 3 or 4 people in the world that knew that we had even thoughts about adoption. And here, this guy calls me up. I mean, you look at all of that. That was God speaking to different individuals. And so today, we would not have children. We would not be a family if God hadn't spoken. Let me give you another story. If I go back some years, there was this young man. He was in the beginning of college, and at the beginning of this journey of hearing God speak. Well, he came to my house one day, and I didn't tell him this, but I was very distraught because we didn't have enough money for our mortgage, and the mortgage was due the next day. We were like $50 short, and I'm sure the bank would have worked with us, all of that, but I felt like a complete failure because I had quit my job as a pastor because I couldn't do that and pursue this new path that God was giving me, and that makes it really hard financially, but I'm trying to say I think God will provide some way. I'm trying to believe that. I'm trying to find a way, but I feel like I've completely blown it. We will not be able to pay our mortgage. I'm embarrassed. And I don't tell that to this young man. And we talk about things for a while. And finally, at the end of the conversation, he looks at me and he says, you know, Ken, I was doing some work for my future father-in-law, and I told him I wanted to do it for free, but he paid me anyway. And so he handed me a check for like $75. He said, I think it's for you. Nobody knew about this except my wife and I. And here, this is how God helped me pay for my mortgage, by a young, poor college student giving me a few dollars. And you know what? I could go on and on. I could give you hundreds upon hundreds of stories of people who didn't get direction by reading the Bible, who didn't know what to do next from reading the Bible. They listened to God, and it gave them direction in life, and it changed my life as well. So that's the first principle, or the first thought, is you can't do it. We cannot live this life without hearing from God. The second one is this: the potential is limitless, and there's nothing that will change your life more. I mean, beginning to hear God speak is like opening up a mine shaft, and there's gold, and there's silver, and there's jewels all over the place buried. You got to search for it. It's a long, hard process, but this mine goes forever. You know, when I came back from Brazil, or I should say when I went to Brazil, I'll get to afterwards later, but when I went to Brazil, I went there because I had this consuming fear in my life, and I was so hopeful that somebody there could help me get rid of it, so that I could begin to live the life that God had for me. And when I found this little 4'0" woman, and she took me into this back little classroom and began to talk to me, and I experienced God in my life. It was absolutely incredible. I mean, the moment that fear broke was so tangible. I mean, I felt it. I felt it in my body. And I knew, this wasn't a guess, because some things you wonder about, some things you guess about. No, I knew for certain that my life would never be the same. It was the most incredible thing I had ever experienced in my life. I thought it would be the most incredible thing I would ever experience in life. I thought I'd be an old man and I'd be telling people about Brazil. I'd just be this wrinkled old guy in the nursing home. I'd be like the people that I used to visit when I was a pastor, like Harry. Harry was this funny old guy, and you had to have an excuse to get out of there because he would keep you all day. But every time he would tell me the same stories. I knew the whole conversation that I would have with Harry before I showed up at the nursing home to talk to him. That's what I thought I would be. This is so incredible. Let me tell you about Brazil. Let me tell you about Brazil. Broken record. But you know what? I almost never, ever talk about Brazil. Because Brazil broke this power in my life, so then I was able to take some steps forward. But when I came back, and God began to show me how he spoke to me, and he began to open up that, holy cow, that is what I talk about all the time, because that continually changes my life, and it continually flips everything upside down for me. Let me tell you a couple of stories of things that I've experienced in my life. Well, one is what I've experienced in my own life. First one was what I saw in somebody else's life. And again, I could give you 100 of these stories. They're absolutely mind-boggling, crazy, wonderful. The first one is about that young man that gave me the $70 or $75 that paid my mortgage. And now we go, it's a couple years later in his life. We're meeting together, we're walking on this local path. And as we walk, he's telling me where he's at in life. He's almost done with school. In fact, he's done with all of his classes, and he's just doing his internship as a teacher before he takes a job. In fact, I think he had a couple of jobs lined up, and he was just trying to decide where was he going to be a teacher. So he's got it figured out, what he's going to do for the next 40 to 50 years of his life. He's just paid thousands upon thousands of dollars to go to school. And I looked at him because suddenly God spoke to me and I had something for him. And I gave him one sentence and I said, Josh, being a teacher is Satan's plan for your life. And I remember it was like this wave hit him. It was boom. But it wasn't like this wave of shock. It was a wave of light, because he instantly knew that what I said was not from me, that it was truly from God, and that it was exactly right. And then he began to tell me all these stories, and I viewed it like almost like this movie projector of his life, where he kept seeing these different things, and he'd see more, and he'd see more. And they were all these different things of where Satan was pushing him to become a teacher. And now he suddenly knew that's not what he was supposed to be. And so here he was, going to spend decades going in this direction. He's just ready to jump off the cliff that way, and God speaks, and now has taken him on this wild, crazy journey in a totally different direction because of God speaking. The last story that I'll end with here is from my own life. For over 20 years, I had seizures in my life. Now the neurologist and those people, they told me, if you're going to have seizures, I had the kind that you want to have. But they really messed up my life. And so there I was for decades having these seizures, taking all kinds of different medication to try and stop them. That was my life. And then I came back from Brazil, and I had this crazy experience with God. And I can't remember, there were like 10 of us in the room or so. And for about an hour, God did these different tangible things in my life. And once it was done, my wife looked at me and she said, "You're healed." And so I asked her later, I said, "What did you mean?" And she goes, "I don't know." And so it was like I was checking my body, because I wasn't thinking about the seizures at the time. I was thinking about other things that I had that I could look at and see, well, did God heal this? Did God heal this in my life? But we didn't know what it was. We knew God had said something, didn't understand it. And so kind of put that off to the side. And then one day, it was, I don't know if it was a month later or what, my good friend who was gifted prophetically, she calls me up and she said, "Oh, I was talking to someone the other day and I told them the amazing story of how you were healed of your seizures." And I stopped her and I said, "Esther, you have the story wrong. I was healed of fear, not of my seizures." And she said, "Oh, okay." Went on, we talked for a while longer, hung up the phone. About a week later, she calls me up, does the same thing again. And she said, "Oh, Ken, I ran into one of your old friends the other day. I was talking to her and I told her the story of how you were healed of your seizures." So finally I said, "Esther, do you think I was healed of my seizures?" And she said, "Well, I don't know." But now I had a woman who is very gifted at hearing from God that started to go around and tell people I was healed. I had this strange sentence from my wife saying that I was healed. So I started to piece it together, and I talked to my doctor and I said, "Well, would it be all right if I tried going off my medication?" He said, "Sure, this is how we'll do it." And that's what I did. And it's now 8 years later. And I take no medication, and I haven't had any seizures. But without God speaking, without us exploring these weird things that didn't make sense, without that, I would still be acting like I had seizures, and I'd still be taking medication that really messes with my mind. And I wouldn't even know that I was healed. So basically, in this introductory lesson, talk, whatever, on hearing from God, I want to tell you at your beginning stages, it's worth it, and it is the most incredible thing that you can begin to find. And if this has whetted your appetite, well, stay tuned for part 2. I'll give you some specifics, some things that hopefully help you take a few more steps to hearing from God for yourself.